French papers now. Dipti is here on set with us. We're starting with Europe's migrant crisis, meeting in the Estonian capital to try and find some solutions, Dipti.
That's right. Europe's interior ministers have gathered in the Estonian capital, Tallinn, to find solutions or try and find solutions, or at least, at the very least, possibilities to resolving the continent's devastating migrant crisis. And Libération on its front page is asking who's going to take responsibility, with a very sobering picture, as you see there, of a drowned female migrant found just 30 kilometers from the Libyan coast. Libé reminds us that at least 2,200 migrants have died trying to reach Europe by crossing the Mediterranean Sea just this year alone, so the first 6 months of this year. To put that into perspective, that's about 12 people a day who are dying trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea. So this is obviously a very, very big crisis. Now, one country that's been on the front lines of this crisis is, of course, Italy. By its pure proximity to Libya, they've been sort of forced to deal with the waves of people arriving on their shores, replacing them or putting them somewhere else, and also leading sea rescues. Well, Paolo Gentiloni's government has now threatened to block its ports to migrant boats as it accuses the EU of lacking solidarity and basically being complacent and leaving Italy to deal with this crisis on its own with its own resources.
Well, many migrants then not making it to Europe, and some drowning at sea, just kilometres, in fact, from where they departed. Now, Libé is also looking at the other side of the migrant crisis, isn't it? That's
right. Libé takes us to a town called Zarzis in Tunisia, near the Libyan border, where they talk of a fisherman who's taken to giving these migrants who've died at sea a proper burial. I quote Shamseddin Marzoug, who is a fisherman, who's also a Red Crescent volunteer. He says, "I feel like their souls are unhappy." And he recounts particularly harrowing days, like one back in 2015 when he buried 53 people in 3 days. Wow. Including a mother who drowned while still clutching her baby. Now, Libération is also calling on the EU to take responsibility. In its editorial, the paper says, doing nothing is to kill. For how long will the EU remain inert? The paper says there are no simple solutions, but there are ways to do things better, like a more equal sharing of refugees around EU countries, or what Libé says calls the creation of an organized humanitarian corridor specifically dedicated to migrants arriving in Europe. Because right now, I quote Libé, that says, this Mediterranean Sea that has been described as the cradle of humanity is today a human graveyard.
Incredibly sad stuff then on migrants there. Now let's move on to Brussels. European leaders, they've been negotiating a little bit discreetly here, really, a free trade agreement with Japan, haven't they?
Very discreetly, actually, maybe even in secret, because we haven't really heard much about this, Stuart. Now, you have CETA, you have TTIP, you have TISA as well, so you'd be forgiven for not being able to keep up with the various acronyms of free trade agreements. Well, now adding to this brotherhood of free trade agreements is JEFTA, which could be signed today, according to Libération. That's a free trade agreement between the EU and Japan. They've apparently been discussing this deal since 2013 without it actually being made public, and it could be signed today as Prime Minister Shinzo Abe meets with Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU Commission chief, and Donald Tusk, the EU Council chief. Now, this deal has drawn criticism from Greenpeace, which accused the bloc of favoring capitalist interests over that of the environment. In particular, they condemned the fact that Japan continues hunting whale meat, which has been banned since 1986. Greenpeace says the EU should have used that as a bargaining chip to get them to stop whale hunting. For its part, the EU has clapped back at Greenpeace's criticism in a pretty strong statement, saying, I quote, "Greenpeace is not known for its keen interest in trade and will oppose any free trade agreement, whatever it is."
Going to talk about the environment now. Here in France, the Ecology Minister, Nicolas Hulot, is set to present the government plans for the environment.
That's right, Nicolas Hulot, who is the ecology minister and a pretty well-known environmentalist here in France. He's presenting the government's measures for accelerating the transition to clean energy, something that Emmanuel Macron did talk about during his campaign. For the communist paper L'Humanité, it's a transition that's largely threatened by the appetites of the finance world. Now, something that might be reassuring for environmentalists, Le Figaro reports that the government is planning to increase taxes on polluting measures like further taxes on petrol, fuel, gas, which ultimately means it's going to weigh more heavily on French households.
And finally, the paper's still full of Simone Veil, the Holocaust survivor and women's rights activist, given that state ceremony, we told you about it yesterday, happened yesterday here in Paris, didn't it?
Yes, and French politicians and Veil's family did attend that ceremony to pay homage to her. The 89-year-old died last week. Now, Emmanuel Macron announced that Veil will be buried at the Panthéon, which serves really as a mausoleum here in France for those who served the country at the highest level in their respective fields. Enter here, Simone. That's what 20 Minutes says on its front page. Interestingly, she'll join her husband, Antoine Veil. The Huffington Post reports that the Veil couple were married for 65 years and were known as an exceptional and inseparable couple. We often say behind every great man is a great woman. I guess the inverse is also true.
Good way of putting it. Thanks so much to Tika Laurent with the French paper. She'll be back with the international ones later on.